We have an epic panel coming up. Growing up, shifts in cultivation, how to evolve. This is incredibly important, figuring out how to optimize cultivation and include technology in that process. This is very exciting. I'm going to pass it off to your moderator, Jimmy Devine, who's a cannabis industry writer and senior staff writer for Cannabis Now magazine, who will introduce your panelists. So give him a round of applause. Woo!
Thank you, everybody. I am so excited. This is a fantastic cultivation panel with a great set of different experiences and at the most cutting edge of what's currently going on in the industry here in California, be it just trying to take part or trying to survive and get that shot in this industry you've been a part of for a long time, like a few of the people we have up here. So I am gonna quickly run down, give everybody a couple minutes just to introduce themselves. What they've been up to lately. Obviously, a lot of them are pretty popular characters in the industry. And then I'll dive in a little bit with them one-on-one. Then we'll go into a group chat. And then at the end, I'm going to save some time for Q&A for sure. So be sure to hold on to your questions. These are great people to ask. So definitely hold on to those for the end, and we'll try and get as many in as we can. So first off, the always awesome Ed Rosenthal, prolific author, prolific educator. How many people across America learn to grow marijuana in their closet from this guy via the written word? Ed, great to see you. How have you been?
Good. I've been good, and I've been researching industrialization of cannabis. So.
Fantastic. You have your newest literary work in front of you. Why don't you show that to everybody real quick?
Buds, Next Generation, it has my name on it, but it was a big team effort, and Greg Zeman played a big part in it, and but there were a lot of people that contributed to it to make it the book that it is. But I've been doing a lot of work in industrialization and also in plant sexuality. I'm sort of a sex worker right now.
All right, fantastic, Ed. We have next. We have Michael from Impello Biosciences to tell us about the world of permaculture. You know, those extra organisms that make your cannabis so much better. Please dive in. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So I'm not quite as well known as I think anybody else on this panel, but that's okay. So we're from Colorado too. My company's Impello Biosciences. We come from the Fort Collins area, and there's a lot of these biotech companies popping up there. Really good resources in that area for producing microbial inoculants. My background's in rhizosphere biology, so we look at, or my specialty is looking at, everything from nematodes to fungi and bacteria, particularly what the plant selects for right on that root zone. That helps increase plant productivity, and even can, when applied properly, increase things like terpenes or cannabinoids, and obviously yields. So we're really trying to take a biological approach and remind people that chemical nutrition is maybe one pillar of plant growth, but biological nutrition has been neglected, but is a really important other part. So that's the gist of it.
Beautiful. So part of that, obviously, people have been brewing up nice teas for a long time. What was the process like trying to take that to the next level? What's that development cycle like? Yeah.
Trying
to make some age-old practice better.
Yeah. So that's a perfect question. So I was working on a hemp farm since 2015, and back in 2015, I was in school at the time, working in a lab and working on this farm, and it became just increasingly obvious that for a 65-acre farm, or now we're getting into 10,000-acre farms, 30,000-acre farms, it becomes pretty impractical to try and brew teas for that entire area. Or to do these really kind of classic things that you can do in a closet, or you can do in a yard, or even on a small farm, but you just can't do on that huge area. So we wanted to look at, what is the most productive parts of those teas that we're brewing, and why do we do that? We're not saying that those teas don't work, but we need something that's scalable and something that was more targeted. So we came up with, essentially a very selective process to come up with a more targeted bacterial product, or a more targeted, other biological products, and that's where we're at now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, we got Swami. Swami's been at every New West, guys. He's the face of cannabis technology.
face of cannabis technology.
But no, seriously though, Swami, super happy to have you here. OG, you know, founder of Swami Selects, Emerald Cup co-head judge, an expert in the finest in just the thought process to determine the finest cannabis possible. So good to see you. What's your last year been like? A lot of craziness in California.
Well, yeah, certainly a lot of craziness, but this year's crop is really looking gorgeous, and we've just been doing a lot more compost teas and all the other stuff, sourcing as much as we can from our own land with wood chips and mown grasses and leaves and all that sort of stuff, and you know, just using as many natural ingredients from our local land and our local area as possible. But for me, it's a learning process, and people like this are really helping us understand. You know, I just learned about, you talk about tech, I just learned about the definition of rhizosphere about 2 years ago. So that's the area around the roots, and that's the most important area we got to deal with, actually. And so it's been a thrill for me to be learning this at my age, to find out that not only is there, you know, life above the soil, life above the above, but there's also life in the soil, and that's what we really got to nourish and facilitate. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
You've been very pro restorative farming for years. Like, are you happy to see the efforts like in this first year of like, you know, this new age of California cannabis? Do you think farming methods are, you know, the best practices or where we want them to be at, or are we still pushing harder to get people to be as responsible as possible with the land?
Well, the living soil movement, regenerative agriculture, is going to save the planet. And if we don't get on it, and we don't do it, and we don't spread the message far and wide as much as we can, as soon as we can, we're going to be in trouble. And, you know, nature's been doing this for, I don't know how many 100,000 years, and nature's pretty good at it, and we just have to kind of tune in with that. And I think there's a big movement. There's several movements now for certification of organic farming methods, or even beyond organic, biologic farming methods, and those are very exciting because people are starting to learn about that stuff. I'm thrilled, you know, just to learn that the plant roots exude. You know, I had to look up the word again, exude, right? So it means that they put out. So the roots are putting out from the bottom of the plant, and what do they put out? Carbon and sugar, right? And that's what then pulls the bacteria and the fungi to the plant. And when they come to the plant to eat what the plant's feeding them, they feed the plant. So, I mean, this is just an amazing system. It's symbiotic in an amazing way. And when you consider that cannabis is the most symbiotic plant with us, and then we're symbiotic, and the plant's symbiotic with the soil, and then I just changed my mind. I'm growing soil, the soil grows the plant, and that's the big realization I've had.
Fantastic. Thank you, Swami. Crystal. Crystal is the advocacy director for the International Cannabis Farmers Association, and she's the founder of Highwater Farms. She grows savage cannabis, I can totally assure you guys. The dark crystal she had at the Emerald Cup last year was one of like the top 5 or 6 strains that you could, like, if you walked around and smelled every jar, hyper competitive. I didn't name it. But, Crystal, you know, you've been killing it on the Hill. You've been organizing homies to take part in this new industry. You've been trying to farm as responsibly as possible yourself. Tell us about what that's been like, dude.
It's been super awesome. I've been recognized a lot of these panelists and for a lot of years, and my previous work was with True Humboldt. I was the operations manager for True Humboldt and the Humboldt Sun Growers Guild, managing and bringing together a lot of farms that were from my culture and the heritage in the hills of Humboldt County, and hesitant and nervous to walk in the path of regulated cannabis. And so we kind of led that charge and led by example, and just kept crossing these boundaries and bringing people with us and saying, come on, let's do this together. Because at least if we get there, we'll all be there together.
What?
And, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And so now, more recently, I stepped away from my position at True Humboldt, the Humboldt Sun Growers Guild, on January 1st. To transition into compliance at my own farm, because we were now fully permitted at the local level and had our annual application in for the state. So I recognized that compliance was going to be really important on the farm in the daily. Those are things that changed from the actual activities that we're used to as farms, nurturing our soil and everything else. So that has been great, and it's allowed me to dive more deeply into the nonprofit work with the ICFA and The ICFA is a group, and we are stakeholders, scientists, and cultivators that have a very narrow scope mission, and our mission is to empower traditional cannabis farmers through research, education, and advocacy. And so sun-grown cannabis has always been really dear to my heart, and something that I really wanted to promote as a world citizen and as a California resident, that I felt matched our climate goals and our ethos as California citizens. And so I'm really proud to serve on that board.
Fantastic. What was trickier? Convincing people that they needed to like squat up to have the best shot against the machine, or convincing people you don't need water to grow pot?
So I transitioned to fully dry farming, so I don't use any water at all in my cultivation practices. And it was hard to convince myself that it would be okay. That was kind of the hardest part. And then next to convince my mom and my family, who would come and have sleepless
Her
nights.
mom grows awesome pot too.
And so, so dry farming is a really unique type of cultivation that can be done in very specific areas. And, I happen to be in a river soil, so I can tap into the abundant groundwater below that comes through the soil. And so dry farming is super awesome, and it was probably the biggest leap I've ever taken in cultivation.
It's more of a year-long process too, just like preparing the soil for what's to come and just getting everything ready to go as much as possible, because once it's in there, it's in.
Yeah, it's transformed so many things, that like even the application of biotics and the application of compost teas and the all of the things that were really part of my cultivation practice, making plant ferments and doing this and that. Well, when you're not watering, now you have to figure, how am I going to get these products into the soil and into these plants? And so you don't, basically. It just turns out that now you're you're observing nature more and trying to mimic those processes. And so we build our plant fertility, our soil fertility in the wintertime through cover cropping, and then we work the top layer of the soil to create space for the dry farming to occur.
Fantastic. All right, and last but not least, on the end there, we got Jeanette from MJ Freeway. Compliance is really important when you're growing pot these days, guys. It's different. So we're going to have her dive into that. What's it like helping cultivators stay on the right side of things and be able to, crush it?
Yeah, so we started not as compliance. We didn't start as compliance, so we created the category of seed-to-sale tracking before there were compliance requirements.
My bad.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to qualify that to say that we didn't start to do compliance. Now it's all about compliance, and compliance is the most important thing. So Crystal was a great segue talking about compliance and that you led that charge. We started because we knew that growers and retailers just needed visibility into their plants. We started in Colorado. Everyone was doing all three things together. You were growing, processing, and retailing. And we just knew you needed visibility into your product. It was your baby, in addition to the fact that it was very valuable, in addition to the fact that it was medicine to patients, and you just needed to be able to see it, not when you're standing in front of it. And it allows cultivators to scale. So no matter what your processes are, you need the ability to scale. You need the ability to manage remotely. You need to be able to use data, which is on the screen, our plant forecasting dashboard. You need to be able to use data to make more intelligent decisions. And you can capture all the inputs that go into the soil and all the things that you're doing in order to be able to, on the other side, say that worked or that didn't work, and here's how we're going to dial it up and change it. And it's not something you've got to remember. When it was smaller, you could remember and you could tell someone, because you saw them all day long, what they needed to do, but you can't be in your facility all the time. You can't remember all the things because now there's so many things. And so it's just the tools that really empower you to make those decisions. So that's kind of our piece of growing up, is talking about how you scale using data to forecast, to improve your processes, et cetera.
What are some of the larger success stories you guys have had from people who kind of wanted to get into that track and trace, like presuming there was going to be a part of compliance later, and really blew up?
So thinking about it from a cultivator's perspective, you've got success stories around being able to really see all of those processes and see what people are doing almost in real time. and then being able to turn that into better decision making. So being able to decide specifically what plants are we going to grow because we get better yield and it's the fastest turn, and it has the best sell-through in the market, because at the end of the day, you've also got to try to be profitable. So how is that sell-through in the market is an important part of the success stories we've had.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Sure.
This one is for the whole team. Mike and Jeanette, feel free to weigh in as best you can. A lot of great, like cannabis isn't fundamentally super hard to grow, but a lot of great pot gets destroyed once it gets chopped down. Why, now that we've had this much progress on so many things in cannabis, why is the curing and drying aspect of things, so many people still getting it wrong, and now at an industrial level? Whoever wants to dive in first, feel free.
Well, I can speak more to the hemp side on that than to the marijuana side. But yeah, I mean, in Colorado in 2015, the farm I was working on harvested 45,000 pounds of hemp. And we didn't have a plan on where or how to dry that until about 2 weeks beforehand. That was, every single week was a new thing. It was the very first year that we were farming hemp. We were growing some of the most hemp in Colorado, and you had to just kind of roll with the punches. That being said, over the last 3 years, I've seen just in the hemp industry in Colorado alone these huge improvements. We went from drying in an old lumber yard to building pretty much state-of-the-art, as far as I'm concerned, greenhouse, head house, hemp drying facility that is designed to preserve everything that the plants produced over that entire growing season. So it's designed to take into account terpene preservation and cannabinoid preservation. Make sure that we're not getting mold, because when you have 60 acres of hemp, it's pretty hard to find 60 acres of warehouse space to dry it in. So you got to really stack plants in there, and there's a lot of logistics that come into it. So there have definitely been some improvements, but we have a long way to go. And this is where I think I really have fun working with people in the industry, because it's like an endless puzzle, and we solve one little piece of it, and then there's something else that you got to consider. So we made good progress, but everyone knows that there's a long way to go.
Crystal?
I like that story because it reminds me of the same problems that we've gone through as small cultivators throughout the years and our history and what we've learned. And we see the big guys coming on board making those same problems that we made as small farmers on a really large scale. On a small farm has small problems, and a big farm has big problems. And so it's something we've all learned. It's something we've all grown more weed than we can dry or something. And industrialization of cannabis and the mechanization is where we do lose all the best parts, that that loving care, the hand trim, the perfect cure, the burping of the bags, like all of the things that we've done. And I don't think it's the end of the world. The cannabis itself isn't really transformed that much. The cannabinoids are still going to be there. The medicine is still going to work. You're not going to have the flavor and the terpenoid content that you would have had, but more people are going to have access to cannabis that they can afford with this industrialization and mechanization. And I see it as a boon and a handout and a great thing for the smaller farms to capture that luxury market, that high-end market, and that market that puts the love and care and concern into the curing and the hand trimming and the processing of their cannabis. And so I see them as two completely different beasts, and the more and the quicker that we can recognize and realize that that experience that we're looking for with this hand trim perfect bud that has been cultivated and cured is going to come from the hands of these small farmers. And that doesn't mean that there can't be affordable and great medicine out there for everyone else that's been machine trimmed and harvested and dried on a large scale.
You want to say something? Go ahead.
I want to acknowledge what Crystal said, because that was beautiful. You laid out a path there is a path for the big farmers and what that looks like, and then there's a path for the boutique luxury brands, and they can live, and they both have a place, and I thought that was great. I wanted to add that the problem you pointed out, Mike, and that you echoed as a problem is one of the things that the data solves. You can forecast, when am I making a big move? So if I'm making a big move, am I moving it from room to room? Am I hanging it up to dry? Am I trimming it? Like, what's the move? And that forecasts that and tells you here's how much you will likely, what's the quantity, what's the pounds you're going to be dealing with, what's the number of plants you're going to be dealing with to help you forecast labor. How many people do I need? And let me go find them now. So you're trying to find good trimmers or good anybody at the last minute, you're in trouble. So it gives you these like dates way in the future and how much labor you're going to need. So I wanted to say that that's one of the things you've got to do to scale up is again use the data and use the tools that are out there to help you do that.
Well, in the drying and the curing, it is really one of the more crucial things. And a lot of the smaller farmers now are starting to scale up. And as you mentioned also, when you scale up, you have to figure, I probably need almost as many square footage to dry as I need to grow. Or otherwise, you can work with cultivars that mature early, harvest those, hang them up, dry them, and then you have other cultivars that come in later, and then you'll do that. And that's really tuning into your seed bank and how they're working. Up here in the mountains, I keep saying we have the best place to grow cannabis. There's a lot of stuff about these big farms growing on contaminated soil because that's where the county says you can't use a new farm, you have to use an old farm. And so not only is the soil contaminated, but the buildings are contaminated and there's blowover from all the other places. Up in the Emerald Triangle, we have the cleanest air, the cleanest water, the cleanest soil in the entire planet. It is the best place to grow clean, pure cannabis. But we have a problem that we don't have large areas, and that's even better also, because when it's a small area, we put the love into it, but it also creates basically an artificial scarcity. And that means that our product, which is the only pure, clean product that you know you're going to get, is a scarce product, and that is going to put the value up for the luxury market. But it doesn't mean that people are cut out, and I think that there is definitely a place for the industrial grow. Where our ranch is, we're surrounded by Douglas fir trees. The air is filtered from the Douglas fir trees, even after it's the cleanest air from across the Pacific. There's something about that curing the cannabis that does something else. And likewise, we're learning 60 degrees, 60% humidity is where you want to be, pretty much. Maybe you want to put a little less humidity when you first hang it up if it's real wet or raining. But basically, hang it as long as you can at 60, and you're going to get a pretty good product.
Get that gooey snap. Woo!
And those are our fall conditions. There are natural fall conditions where we...
Exactly right. So you do have to worry about sometimes in the drying shed that there is mold or mildew or something like that. Every once in a while we go and we spray it with, what's that new stuff, the chlorine, chlorine oxide, something like that. That's not a harmful oil, it's a form of Clorox, but it's different, it's lighter, and that you can spray your building with that, and it goes against the bacteria and so on.
And we've had a dry weather pattern in the last few years too. It's not to say like those. Those
how many dehumidifiers do you need, and how much electricity do you need? That's another consideration, and it all depends on the outside humidity. And one year we didn't even turn on our dehumidifiers at all. The next year we had them on constantly. So you got to be paying attention and watch how it dries.
For sure.
You've been listening to a lot of myths. The first myth is that handcrafted is necessarily better than industrially grown. So I want you to think of something. I'm going to take it out of cannabis for a moment. You go into a store and you see these beautiful ornamental plants. Let's say they're these little pepper plants with little peppers on them that you buy around Christmas time. And you look, and the pots are in these trays, these plastic trays. And you look at those plants, and every one of those plants is perfect. And you look at them, and they're all virtually the same in their looks. When you pick up that pot, you are the first person to ever touch anything dealing with that plant or that pot. The seeds were stuck into the media by a machine. They were transplanted by a machine. They were pruned optically by machine. The entire process was governed by controls. You look around in the greenhouse where it was grown, you say, where are the people? there are very few people. It's all controlled automatically. The plants are retransplanted. The pots are placed in the trays by machine. The trays are stacked by machine. And then they're delivered to the store. They're unwrapped. And when you pick it up, you're the first person to touch it. Now, a lot of, like the pruning, I think that pruning is eventually going to go to optical pruning with a laser so that humans won't touch it. And I think that's better than having humans touch the bud and mess it up. And every part of what people have been talking about, the curing, to really get good curing, and you're doing it, it's all done by controls, so that you don't need somebody to go in and say, I think it's a little too moist or a little too dry. The entire system is controlled, and what I'm trying to say by it is don't think that you need like this hand work in order to get superb quality. It just is not true. But wait a second, and as for curing, yes, that's the most important part. And if you're burping, if you're putting your plants or your buds into some container and burping it, what you're doing is causing bacterial infection, because what you're doing is increasing the humidity in that area so much that it promotes bacteria. And then you try to open it up and dry it. That's not the way to cure. By the way, I do have a book called Harvest, which describes how to cure. And every part of what people do, they think it can be changed, and it will be industrialized, and it should be industrialized. But I have one more point to make, that all cultivation is antiquated. And think of this. If you take the genome for marijuana, for a particular variety of marijuana, and you put it into yeast, and then you take a bucket and you put that yeast into the bucket with some water and sugar, you're going to get the exact THC and terpenes that you want from that yeast in 5 days. No more lights. And that's the future, at least, of concentrates. That it's not going to be grown under lights or under the sun. It's going to be grown primarily in a bucket of one sort or another. And don't think
I hope I'm not here for that.
Well, you might be doing, but you might be doing it. So you go to the store, you buy a particular yeast, right? You buy, okay, I want Blue Dream. So you buy Blue Dream yeast, you put it into the bucket, you put some sugar in it, and 5 days later, you have your THC.
You're welcome to it.
Well, why not? Why not do that? Why not do it?
On the control side of things you mentioned before, isn't there a certain amount of human interaction needed just to make sure the controls are working right from strain to strain? Like, how long does it need to sit in there at 60-60 to make sure we get that perfect snap, to keep that resinous coating? Like, there's not a...
You're measuring it. There's a way to measure what's going on with the plant. And so it's an interaction between the measurement of the environment in the plant.
But you still would need to interact with the plants to get those baseline measurements. To know what you were looking at was right.
Well, when you drive a car, do you know how it's working?
Generally.
No, you don't. You put the key in or you press a button and it drives. But you don't know what's going on inside of it. You're not. The car itself is automatically doing those measurements now more than ever. Same thing.
But what's doing it, though? What's the thing like?
Well, once you develop a standard, you have automated processes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hear you. I was just talking about curing in the moment, though. Like, there isn't a robot yet that can go into your crop and cut it down, flip it upside down, scan the buds for their, how stiff is the stem now, how much moisture is left in the bud, because it'd be here.
5 years.
Touche. All right, I'll take that. All right. All right, on to the next question, which is a perfect segue. Thank you, Ed. How do we describe boutique weed in this day and age? Because we can see a lot of press releases these days about fantastic cannabis. But what should the consumer truly be looking for, and what should the cultivator really be, aspire to produce? Like, what's that? How do they know they're really hitting those peaks? Like, what are the challenges you guys hold yourselves to when you start a crop? And, those mile points where it's just like, okay, I'm doing it right. Besides, good vibes.
I think it depends on your consumer. Who are you as a human? What are your values and what are you doing? And who is your consumer? So, 9 out of 10 people that go to McDonald's probably don't ask for an organic salad. And so, but McDonald's would tell you, I sell more hamburgers than salad, and salad, hamburgers sell 10 to 1, or whatever they would say. And so for me, absolutely, a majority of the grocery stores in the United States are going to have a control-grown hothouse tomato that's been mostly grown with controls in an environment that is controlled with a shelf-stable product. And, it's perfectly round, it's perfectly red, and that's what people are buying. But that's not my people. Those aren't my values. Those aren't my consumer. So for me, I target the consumer that cares about the things that I care about. And so I go a product that I know they're looking for. And so my tomatoes are warty and purple and amazing. And some years are amazing, and some years are not so amazing. And that's part of the journey. And so I think there's consumers across the whole spectrum. And I think that everything that Ed says about industrialization and about all of that stuff is absolutely true. Controls are amazing. But I think there are people who are more likely there are a small section of people, just like there are a small amount of people who are going to maintain living in a natural environment and, cultivating cannabis in what they deem is with the controls of nature and not them, man being the controller.
I read that there's a phone app that you can have on your charcoal barbecue that tells you when the coals are exactly ready. And then there's another phone app that you can put on your steak that tells you when your steak is ready. And so what this does is put a machine between you and the actual interaction with whatever you're doing. And if you want to do that, you're perfectly welcome to that. I kind of have the polar opposite of what Ed is talking about, where when I go out to the plants, I don't talk to the plants, I listen to the plants. I ask the plants themselves to tell me what it is they want to do. And so I'm always listening, and I'm always trying to respond to what it is. And part of this is because the symbiotic relationship we have with this plant, which humans have had with this plant for over 10,000 years, and that we now that we have endocannabinoids within us, which is part of the symbiosis between the phytocannabinoids and the ones we have in us. So there is no plant that is more connected with humans than any one than this. And if we need to have mass production for the masses, that's one thing. But there always will be a market for, and if you look at the tobacco market or the wine market, there's a $50 bottle of wine, and there's, I don't know if it's $2 anymore, but there used to be $2 chuck. And so that, where is your place in the market? What is it that you want? And if you want something that's, had extra care and extra love and extra attention on it, then you're going to pay a little more for it. And if you want to have your little dab or your little vaporizer and you don't care what's in it, then you're fine with that. But I would maintain that there's something essentially different between a plant that's grown with someone listening to the plant and responding with love and something that's applied from a mass market. And I know where I'm on that, and anyone else wants to do that, that's fine with me too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in agreement that it ultimately comes down to your market. Like, are you trying to, get cannabinoid products out to as many people as possible, or are you trying to really focus on boutique consumers? And like Swami just said, that it goes for pretty much every market, whether that's clothing or wine or tobacco or whatever. There's always going to be people who want that boutique. I think I come, and I know a lot of people that I work with come from, this plant passion kind of standpoint of we're incredibly passionate about cannabis, more so than just we like to consume marijuana. we know that it's something that a lot of people need to start consuming, or we want to make it available to as many people as possible. Boutique is always going to have a place, but it's just not going to be, it's not the fast track to get cannabinoids and even terpenes available to the mass market. To get to that, we have to do more industrialization, which goes from everything from data collection to the future, like what Ed's talking about. I think there's a lot of steps between where we're at with boutique, and honestly, most of the market right now seems to still be using a lot of the boutique practices that are, they're trying to scale up, realizing that that's not really practical, and then looking at, way into the future at options like, what Ed's talking about with bioengineering and whatnot.
Well, it's not as complex as that. Fruit are often picked by measuring the sugar content optically. And so they say this fruit is ripe because they have a standard for measuring it. And that standard and that optical method of choosing it, electronic optical, might be more accurate than even the most knowledgeable picker. And you have the same thing in surgery. You have robotic surgery now, and the robotic surgery is actually more accurate than having the most skilled surgeon do it. And this is the same thing. We're just using tools that are measuring the same thing that we are, and maybe they can do it more accurately. Maybe they don't have a hangover. Maybe they're not tired at the moment. Maybe they didn't have a fight with their spouse in the morning before they went to look at the things. So you get a more objective thing. And to say just because something is done by machine that you don't get the quality of a handcraft. Actually, think of a handcrafted sweater versus one that's knitted by machine. And the way that you know it's handcrafted is by the imperfections. Not by the perfection, but the imperfections. And so the reason why humans have always gone to machines and more is because it provides a better service than we can do ourselves. That's why we use computers. Computers can do things faster than we can. Same thing.
I need that computer for my melon harvest because years and years, and I still have to cut 3 open before one's ripe.
Fantastic. Next one, guys. What do you, in this moment for cultivators, what would you say is more important? Trying to push the cannabis genome yourself, propagate, find that newest edge of the Phylos galaxy, or just trying to find a viable commercial cut and just, make it?
That's a fun one. I think where we're at, kind of again what Ed's talking about, and I have some background in university research, so you hear people, especially PhDs who are hyper specialized in certain things. We'll talk about genomics. We'll talk about sequencing. We'll talk about everything and all these capabilities that we have with it. I have some experience with that too. With the rhizosphere biology, we could go in and essentially pull any plant out of the dirt and shake the dirt off the roots and then run it through a nanodrop and a qPCR and figure out exactly what bacteria are in there. That being said, when we get that, we'll get 10,000 species backlisted, and 9,000 of them we can't even identify. We don't know what they are. So it just says unidentified, 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 unidentified. I think the same kind of goes for cannabis when you think about it. How many different cannabinoids and terpenes do most testing labs even consider right now? It's like 6 cannabinoids and 30 terpenes on the, for the best, yeah. There's a ton that we can do with breeding and with the newer genomic technology to, figure out which ones we want and do, whether it's kind of more traditional breeding or advanced targeted breeding to get and elicit certain characteristics. But there's also going to be a lot that we can do in the future when we start considering more possibilities. And this is where I, again, concur with that. I think we're going to get more towards that, growing cannabinoids in a bucket. But right now, the plant is a pretty incredible vehicle. It's almost a black box. We know some of what's going on in the plant. We know how, roughly, cannabinoids and terpenes are synthesized in the plant. But how does that all correlate with the cannastibeans and flavonoids and all the things that these testing labs don't even consider, and we don't really take into account when we're breeding cannabis right now because we have no way to quantify it. So I think it's going to be a progression of this combination of data and this combination of boutique aspirations where we know what we want and we know really kind of how to get there, but we need a combination of newer technologies and older philosophies to get to the edge of the phyllosphere, if you want to call it that.
One of the things that I've been working on quite a lot lately is what we call the Appellations Project. And the Appellations Project is working to get cannabis considered like French wine, where certain regional areas like Bordeaux or Burgundy or Champagne have a certification that inform you that the grapes and the process are guaranteed to be indigenous to that or from that region. And so the cultivars that they've created are varietals over the centuries and centuries in France and other places. They know which grapes traditionally grown best there. We're not to that state really up in the Emerald Triangle, but I think in terms of the appellation process that we are finding those cultivars which work best in certain areas. I certainly think you have ones that grow better in your dry farming technique, which would not be good in a really coastal range where there's lots of fog. They maybe wouldn't be very good on the hot top of the mountain where there is no groundwater and so on. So there's a way where we can work together with science to find those things which are going to work. But once again, I'm the boutique guy, and that's going to be with the personal experience of people finding out that, well, this crop, and I think track and trace will help with that as well, some data to say, okay, this crop here with this cultivar only produced half a pound of plant, it got lots of powdery mildew, et cetera, et cetera. Let's not grow that next year. And this is a
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So if a plant, let's say a plant is grown, in a specific area, but it's not grown in native soil. In other words, it's grown in a raised bed of some sort or a bag of some sort with soil that's imported. Would that be considered?
Well, that's the key question that everybody asks us.
Yeah, so
yeah, I have an answer.
Not grown so the question that I had was, if it's not grown in a native soil, should you put an appellation?
Yeah, that is the key question, and we've come up with an answer for that. Thank you, Ed. And I've been talking with Frenchy Cannoli, who's about as adamant about this as anyone can be. Yeah, we know that most people up in the mountains have been using ocean forest and happy frog for years and years and years. So the argument goes that you have whatever your source of your soil has been. If you now are growing, number one, in the ground, and number two, in full sun, those are the two first basic principles that we're having for appellation. It's got to meet those two. If it's not in the ground, not in full sun, we're not even considering it. But, so you have your ocean forest and you have your happy frog. Now, the question is, after 3 to 4 years, if you are now using living soil regenerative agricultural methods, after 3 or 4 years, with putting in local amendments and so on, and putting in your compost teas and your fermented plant juices, which are locally derived, and your manure locally derived, over time, you will now have a soil which is representative of your area, and the hyphae of the fungi are going to be reaching out into the surrounding soil, and the bacteria also, and they will come, and they will, over time, they will make your soil a native expression of the area.
I think if you actually tested that theory, you would find that the soil that you adjusted for years and years and the soil right next to it that you didn't adjust were far apart, with major differences in the rhizosphere, in the bacteria in the soil. They're not alike at all.
Well, that's what the science will probably
I think, well, that's testing. I mean, we're both.
Well, there's a hard way to test it.
Yeah, but I think that, if you started with soil with a mix that wasn't native, and you're adding to it, even if you're putting in native things to it, those two soils are not going to be anywhere near alike. Very often you're dealing with a clay soil as a native soil, and here you have this nice porous soil. They're just different soils.
I think that's true. I mean, I grow in 100% native soil, so it's easy for me to say, like, yeah, 100% native soil is a component of appellation of origin. Yeah. But I think your same appellation of origin is deeper than that. It doesn't just come down to your soil type. It's all of it. It's the interaction with the rhizosphere. It's the interaction with all of the, everything that's around. It's the interaction with the wild nature, the humidity, the sun, the interaction with the farmer, the culture of the farmer, the person's spirit, the culture of the winemaker. And so I think that same question, the same thing you said, if you scratch the root of the champagne, of the plant where the grape is actually grown in the Champagne region over years and years, it's going to be different than the soil that you move 10 feet over and scratch from the hillside, because we're humans and we're interacting with this plant in this way. And so absolutely we're changing the dynamic nature of what is going on with the plant and what's going on at the root level of the plant, but there's nothing in appellation of origin that says that there's not a human component to appellation of origin. There is a human component.
So as far as the microbial stuff goes, I think what Ed and Swami are both saying can both be true. What's interesting, if you looked at, we're sitting 2 feet away from each other. If you looked at our skin microbiomes, we would probably, he has different bacteria on it than I do, and then Swami does than all of us. Or if you look at a family, who lives in the same house and eats the same food, and looked at their gut microbiomes, you're going to find totally different, compositions in there. But at the same time, if you distill it and you look at, okay, there's 10,000 different species in every, milliliter of whatever, or every gram of skin that or square centimeter, there's going to be a few species that are very dominant. And this is, I think, in the rhizosphere biology area, where it's almost refreshing because there's so much data out there. And we're using computers to make sense of that data because it's just way too vast for our heads to kind of wrap around and make any sense of it. At the same time, we do have the technology right now to simplify it and say, okay, well, out of the 10,000 species, we can identify 9,000 of them. Out of the 1,000 that we can, 900 of those are in such a low concentration that they're arguably not doing anything. Out of the 100 that are left, maybe 10 of them are known to be plant growth promoting in some way. And out of those 10, only 2 of them or 5 of them can be cultured together and work together. So that plays into what I do at my company, but also this whole terroir and this whole champagne grape thing. I don't think we know enough right now to say, this and this and these factors are exactly what's contributing to the flavor of Bordeaux or something else. But we do have some information, to distill it down to and say, okay, well, there are some common factors, and at least that's a starting point, and we can get much more advanced and come up with paint a much clearer picture as far as the nuances and the differences between a plant grown in native soil or non-native soil, and why and how that makes a difference.
Fantastic. We are going to start our Q&A right up front, so if anyone has questions in the back, hold on to those.
Hi, just 2 seconds of guerrilla marketing. My name is Becca Dubois. My company is Can Account Pro. I do accounting and taxes for cannabis companies. I've also been a master gardener, so I want to talk a little bit about the soil issue. When I had my own grows in my backyard, we had clay, and even the recommendation from Common Ground and John Jevons, who you probably know up there where you are, said at least 1/3 of that has to be topsoil from the clay. Mix it in with chicken manure and rice hulls and aged horse manure in order to be able to get, the kind of soil that you need to do organic gardening. So I'm totally on board with that. The other thing is the people that are doing what you're doing. You're gardening and you're providing the top quality, well, maybe not the top quality, but the boutiques. There has to be a place for the boutiques. What I would love to see is for the boutique growers with the appellations to be able to do marketing online directly to the consumer and have like a subscription service to the people who are your customers. So you can ask, say, okay, we need $1,200 a year for this amount of product, and we'll send it to you every week or every month or whatever. But on the other hand, the AI and well, I guess the question is that something that's on the forefront for you? Is that something that you can do? To be able
you
to,
mean ship online?
right.
I hope eventually. You know, it's definitely a path, and wine growers can do it in California. And so as we see federal legalization, I think that things are going to change, and a lot of pressure will ease up, and the farmers will have more direct access. Thank you.
Anybody have a question? Fantastic.
Speaking along the lines of wine, a lot of what you're doing sounds like it's what they call Demeter certified biodynamic. Do you know if there's any plans to create some kind of body like that so boutique cultivators could say, hey, this is like Demeter certified biodynamic or anything like that? Is there, because, you know, not always the same, and to have something like that would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, I'll go with that. There are many different things on the market. We have Dragonfly Earth Medicine, which is really loved and revered amongst farmers and cultivators. That is like our self-certifying body, and you know, as mostly I think cultivators are really attracted to that because it is something that is kind of from our community. And that one has existed for a while. There's Clean Green Certification, which is more following the NOP, the National Organic Program, kind of guidelines, and these are all kind of private businesses at this point. CDFA has been tasked with coming up with an organic certification for cannabis cultivation. I think that'll come online sometime by 2020, I'm pretty sure.
Appellation too,
Yeah, and they're certifying Appellation also. And then recently, there's Certified Kind up in Oregon that's based on Oregon Tilth. And so there are a lot of places that you can look for these certifications. I think Demeter actually will certify cannabis too. There are biodynamic cannabis producers. And so lately, Swami and I were just talking when we started the panel before personally about a new one that is out that has been coming online called Sun and Earth Certified. And Sun and Earth Certified has been spearheaded by Dr. Bronner's, the soap company really rooted in ethos and values. And this certification uses the National Organic Program as a baseline and then goes from there and has like social justice, has education components, has labor components, and all these really beautiful aspects. So we are in the public comment period on that standard. And so if you go to sunandearthcertified.org, you will be able to look at the standard and submit comments.
All right, I have time for one more question. What's everybody's favorite cut of the moment?
That one's easy.
Strain.
It's always going to be the same, Jack Herrera.
Okay, cool.
Well, yeah, actually I want to say we're trying to use the word cultivar instead of strain these days,
Cultivar.
which seems to be more scientific. I've been told that strain refers to microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and if you want to talk about plants, you really want to use either the word variety or with grapes varietal or with plants that are cultivated cultivar. So I'm trying to train myself. I always lose it, but that's the thing. As far as favorite cultivar, I just don't have one. We all grow from from seed, full sun, long season. I just, whatever one falls into my hand and smells right, that's the one I'm going to smoke.
So we have this thing at my house and my family called the jar test. Most of my family grows and consumes cannabis, and so we have our own personal cups every time we visit, which is everyone has their jars out, and the first one that's smoked up is the one that was the best because we all honestly smoked that one first. And so the jar test, we have a varietal of the Candyland, which is a cookie cross that is back crossed on Granddaddy Perks one more time. It has won the Humboldt Cup. Somebody gave it Bay Area's best holiday weed once. There was a bunch of shout outs that it's had, but that particular cut of the Candyland I have that we call the Grandyland has probably been winning the jar test in my house for over 7 years. So even this season we had one plant in the dep that was just a little personal plant set off to the side, and it's gone already. And so the Grandyland's still holding it down at my house.
My husband has a cultivar. It's Wi-Fi. It's a Whitefire OG cross. So that's always my favorite. But I got some GMO. Has anyone had that out of Michigan? And it's amazing.
First
So-
cut the Jungle Boys propagated
Is that
knowledge.
right? Okay. It's the first time I'd had it, and I was like blown away. Garlic, mushroom, and onions.
How'd it get to Michigan?
It was phenomenal. So I also like that.
Did you track and trace it all the way there?
No, I did not. Oh, right. I should. Right. Whoops. Anyway, also though, Jack Herrera is the #1 selling strain in the U.S. right now. So that's some data point for you.
All right, well, that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much. A round of applause for our fantastic panel. Killers, all super approachable, super nice people. And how about those differing opinions, huh? That was great.